Okay, yeah, I'm back again. Hold on, this calls for a drink. I'm here with what is arguably the most influential Honda ever. Fight me. Hi, Steph.
Hi, John.
How are you?
Good.
You're like the FD guy. What are you bringing us today?
This is a Honda Civic.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So much history in this car. In my eyes, this is the most influential Honda in the Honda community because this has done so many firsts. You were like first into the 8s, first into the 9s, first to 150, first to 160, first to 170. Done so much, but the construction of this car is remarkable. Why?
Built in 1998, 1999. So this was at a time when front-wheel drive drag racing was really starting to be popular, and it was like the whole import scene. And this was one of the first tube chassis front-wheel drive drag race cars, probably the first that really ran well. From the ground up, it's fully tube chassis. It has a steel body and fiberglass front end. But other than that, it's all hand-built by the late Sean Carlson.
This to me looks like an EK chassis, but it's not.
It is an EK, but the chassis isn't. What we did was actually built a tube chassis and then went to Honda and got a roof, an A-pillar, the quarter panel, the door, and actually just got those body replacement panels and then mounted them on the tube chassis and then filled in all of the gaps, at the body shop. Actually, Sean welded all kinds of metal into it. It never actually started off as an EK Civic. It started off as a tube chassis, and then we bought panels to put on.
Didn't this start as an engine swap on your EG?
I had a 91 Civic Si with Prelude 2.3, the H22 engine, turbocharged, and was already running 1060s with that old 91 Civic with that engine swap. The car was so beat up from like notching the frame rails and trying to get that big engine to fit into the little Civic. So Sean Carlson, great fabricator, we ended up doing a tube chassis to the front of the 91 Civic. We ran it as that 91 Civic, but front halved. But we're like, I think we can make it faster if we get the rest of the carb tube chassis. And then it kind of snowballed. We're like, well, I guess if we're going to tube chassis the whole thing, why would we do a 91 Civic? Why don't we just get whatever the current car was? And why don't we just turn it into a brand new Civic? Turn the front half car into a full tube chassis, and then ended up cutting up the old 91 Civic into just little pieces, put in the dumpster, and then got the rest of the steel components from Honda and then built the rest of the body onto it. The biggest goal in 1998 was the first into the 9s. And no one had done it. We wanted to be the first to do that. We were debuting this car at Bally Imports, huge import drag race, but we wanted to test the car before we debuted it. So we had a private test day up at that drag strip and actually ran into the 9s in testing. The event finally came around that weekend. We did a couple of 10-second passes, and then when we finally ran into the 9s, everybody thought that was the first 9-second quarter mile, but it was actually the second.
What is the weight distribution? It's got to be like a 90-10 or something like this on this one. It's got to be pretty extreme.
So with me in the car weighed 1,650 pounds. And I was probably about 150 pounds at the time. So this was a 1,500-pound car going, 150 miles an hour and then pulling a chute. This is so light, it probably only has 300 or 400 pounds on the rear axle of the car. Almost everything was on the front. So we did two things to stop the rear end from coming up. One was we mounted the parachute a little bit higher, and then we added the wing for a little bit of downforce.
And what's this back here?
The engine did not use an alternator, so the battery had to be charged in between rounds. So you'd hook a battery charger up to these two posts. This is an on and off switch, and then we had a voltmeter gauge just to see what the battery condition is. And this, the old data loggers back in the days, the crew guy before the car launched would actually have to turn the data logger on.
Because you didn't want to record for too long because you'd fill up the memory, or?
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of memory. And then it didn't know when to record, so you had to just manually do it.
Wow, you had to literally turn the data logger on.
Yep,
so,
that's
wow.
right.
Can you open up the doors, or do they do more than open, or does it?
So there's actually two latches. There's a top latch, which unhooks basically the window so the windows don't peel out, and then the standard door handle. And then we can actually pull the whole door off.
What?
So this just has a little hook.
So is this fiberglass, carbon fiber?
This is fiberglass door. The door hinges are just little posts.
What?
And if I lift it up,
So fancy.
the whole door comes off.
How about the cage configuration? Is this pretty much how it was when you built it?
Yeah, so you have to have certain bars, certain diameter.
Intrusion
and then you have
bars.
what they call like a funny car cage,
Yep.
a window net, which has a little seatbelt latch on it.
This was the way it was built when you and Sean built it.
100%, yeah, this is how it was built.
Wow. So you guys knew you were going to go that fast, so built it toward NHRA spec.
Absolutely.
I really like the pedal box here.
Yeah, so the way this works is you can see the bars here. This is the chassis. This is it, are these bars. And then this piece of aluminum panel
Yes.
is the bottom of the car. This is made out of aluminum and it's just riveted to the tube chassis to separate, I guess, the outside from the inside of the car. But it's not strong enough to step on. So that's why this other panel is here, which has steel welded to it. So if you get in the car, you don't want to step here because you could push through to the bottom. You step here. And so the pedal box and everything and where your feet go is on that separate subpanel.
Is this the seat that was on it?
Yeah, this is just an aluminum seat. Again, we were choosing the lightest parts that we could
Completely.
get, even down to the seat belt. It just goes around the bar and then back again. If you look at it, there's no like buckle or anything like that. So it's actually lighter than other forms of seat belt. Inside, we've got a handbrake, so staging brake.
Okay.
So that way I could be on the throttle. So the car originally, when it was built, didn't have like a two-step rev limiter. You had to use your foot to get it to the RPM that you wanted to launch at, and then you'd creep in with the clutch, and then in order to stop the car at exactly where you wanted in the staging beams, pull the handbrake a little bit, load the clutch, so all the drivetrain would be sort of loaded up.
Set up, yes.
And then launch the car and let go of all that stuff. Because if you just had the clutch all the way in and just sidestepped it without the drivetrain all being loaded up, you break axles and break the transmission because it still had a
because
prelude
you'd shock the
transmission.
drivetrain.
Why we ended up stopping running this car was we couldn't do more than 2 or 3 runs without breaking the prelude transmission that was in it. So this is just clutch for the hydraulic release bearing in the prelude transmission. The brake pedal only activated the front brake caliper. If you use the rear at all, they would just lock them up. So this is just front brake.
Okay.
This is just rear brake.
Okay.
And I didn't use this to slow the car down the end because you could crash it really easily like that. It's actually a Honda Prelude gear shifter.
Standard
all
H
mounted
pattern.
in there. The dash is a cool little carbon fiber piece. The dashboard is a drag racing Trans Am fiberglass one from like a Jerry Bickle or like the drag racing catalog.
And you just cut it up and modified it?
Yeah.
Bonus points for the Autometer Monster Tack.
Yeah, that's classic. You don't see many of those nowadays in the scene.
And then obviously your partner is Agretti. Is that, oh my God, is that an old school Profect B?
Yeah, that's how we controlled the boost was with this.
Can we see what's on the other side?
You got to look in here first. You got to see what the switch panel is.
Oh, what?
Yeah. So again, like a traditional drag racing, ignition on, the start button. This could be fuel pumps. And then this little box opens and you can get onto all the wiring. And you can see the wiring running down. This lever here, when you pull that, or if as a driver you actually would push it, that releases the parachute.
Wow.
We can actually pull the dash off too, and you can see underneath. So
The dash actually comes
this
out of the vehicle? Oh.
So this is the ECU that controls the engine. Later on, we did add a 2-step switch. This actually took little pills. So if you're on the clutch at the starting line and I want it to sit at 5,000 RPM, you don't program that anywhere. You would literally put in this little switch.
RPMs,
so there's a 5,000 RPM pill.
What?
This is actually the water tank for the water air intercooler.
Okay.
So this opens, ice water goes in here.
Should I not pour my beer in there? Would that not be good?
Not ideal. Okay. And then this is a water pump. The water pump pumps the ice water through water air intercooler of the hood.
Completely.
And that way, the water air intercooler not only cools the charge air from the turbo better, but we don't have to have any opening in the front end for better aerodynamics.
Completely. On an air-to-air intercooler, essentially.
Air-to-air intercooler, you'd have to have an opening
You have
so
to
you
have
get air
yes,
to it.
yes.
But on the water-to-air, like we ran, you don't have to have an opening.
Could we open up the hood?
Yeah.
So this is an H22 with an H23 bottom end and block.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah, the blocks for the H22 and H23 are the same, like the actual physical block.
Okay.
The crank rods and pistons were different.
So this was like an early stroker kit, essentially using factory Honda internals.
Yeah, you know, back when we were building this, there was a lot of parts on the aftermarket that just weren't good. So I really tried to use as much factory stuff as possible. So it's all right, I'm gonna use the H23 crank and the H23 block to get a 2.3 liter setup, and then we would go with forge rods and pistons. The head, we had it ported. Stock cams, we did the adjustable AEM cam gears, stock head bolts. The head bolts were replaced every time the engine was reassembled.
You'd stretch the stock head bolts.
I don't know. People would blow head gaskets.
Yeah.
I'm like, brand new head gasket and brand new bolts every time we put it together, and we didn't have problems with it.
Wow, okay.
But you have to remember that back when we built this engine, it was probably making 600 horsepower.
I thought it peaked out at 650, I think you guys got it to.
Something like that. Yeah. Nowadays, that's not a lot of power, but back then it was quite a bit.
Where are you making all that power, a majority of that power from?
Yeah, from Boost. So this was this Greddy Mitsubishi turbo. It actually still spins. And at the time, this was a pretty big turbo for, what they call a small engine,
Completely.
But it actually worked out really well. John from High Tech Headers built this really trick header. It all super nice welds
Equal
and everything.
length?
Yeah,
Okay.
and it's what they call tangential turbo housing. So there's actually two inlets.
So it's a 4 into 2.
Yep, and then these two tubes go off to the wastegate. So this is what controls the boost.
Yes.
And then we've got the downpipe and then the wastegate tube, and then both pointed out the side of the car. We didn't want to bring it all the way to the back.
Completely.
Theory was, we'll point these up a little bit. That way maybe we'll get a little bit more downforce
and more traction. I love that.
And this is stuff that the NHRA, like Top Fuels and stuff already do.
Yes, exactly.
And we're trying to take those ideas and applying it to our front-wheel drive
you
stuff.
think you're an NHRA guy, don't you?
Oh, we want to go fast, man.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is why I love this car so much, because no one was doing this.
So this is the intercooler.
That's your intercooler.
So from the air from the turbo gets pulled in here.
Yep.
It gets compressed in the compressor.
Yep.
Then it goes out through this tube, and then it goes through this intercooler. So the air goes this way, right, before it goes into the engine, and the water goes this way. And it looks like an intercooler, like a radiator inside here.
Completely.
And so as the charged air comes in,
flowing
it's
through
cooled.
a cool air.
Exactly.
Oh.
And then you get the cold air into the engine, makes more power.
Completely. What about for your throttle body element?
Stock. This is stock Prelude. It actually has a throttle cable from maybe some kind of Civic or something.
Okay.
And it's Prelude intake manifold. And then we had a custom fuel rail with much larger injectors.
Okay.
So the front hub is actually from a Prelude, but then it was modified to allow these links. But Sean and I knew so little about suspension design. We kind of designed this weird 4-link thing, but the geometry is so bad that this thing had shocks and springs on it. When it would go through the travel, it would have tons of bump steer, which means that instead of the car at normal ride height, the wheels are straight ahead.
Yes.
And then when you
Under
compress
compression.
the spring, it would like toe in and toe out,
as it cycled through.
Yeah, and the car was uncontrollable. It didn't work well. So we said, you know what? We don't need suspension. Let's just put some bars in instead of front shock. So the front of the car actually has no suspension.
No suspension.
It doesn't work. NHRA, like Top Fuels and funny cars actually don't use suspension.
Yep.
Your suspension now is the low tire pressure from the front tires.
And then what size tire is this?
So this is an M&H tire. Dude, I don't even know. I think it's a 34.5.
This is
it's
maybe
a 24.5 probably, or a 26.
26 at
maybe
best.
26?
Yeah,
Okay.
Somebody on the comments tell us what size tire this is that remembers this
Maybe
car.
the other side has it.
What wheels are these?
This is a weld wheel.
Oh,
So this
weld,
was a wheel for like a rear-wheel drive car, and we just put it on the front.
So this is a rear-wheel drive slick that you put on the front.
Nobody, like when we built this car, there was no such thing as a front-wheel drive slick for drag racing, so we had to adapt a bunch of rear-wheel drive stuff to the car. The tube chassis and everything allows more tire fitment. We're limited because on width, right? The engine's a certain width in transmission, the tire's a certain width. So the overall width of the car is actually much wider than a normal Civic. If you look at the car from the front, the car is actually 10 inches wider than a stock Civic. And the whole front end was sectioned, widened, so we can get the front fenders over both of the front tires.
To somehow still resemble an EK.
Exactly. But the rear of the car is stock. So the whole car is like a V shape.
A boat tail, essentially.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so this had a Civic roof on it, a steel roof, and then the Civic panels, but it had these big like pie cuts
sections
that were wide. So if you get the right perspective, you can see the whole car is like V-shaped.
So you guys essentially built it around getting these front wheels underneath it.
Yep, this is a giant front windshield.
So, yes.
This is probably like a Trans Am windshield also that we cut down.
With the hood off, you could totally see it now.
We've got the radiator up here.
Okay.
So this is just a 92 to 96 fluid ion radiator. This is what would just go in a Civic, and we're like, oh, this thing's always cooled well, so let's just use a radiator. Let's not do something custom.
Could we get this thing up on the lift?
Yeah, let's get on the lift.
What are we looking at here?
Yep, so this is a front wheel tire. This rear suspension of this and the wheel is from the front of like a Pro Stock NHRA car. And these are actually, these are not lug nuts or lug bolt. This is where the rotor, which is aluminum, it's an aluminum rotor, not a steel rotor.
Wait, what are you telling me?
Yeah, the brake rotor is made out of aluminum because we only use it for the handbrake and staging. So we want it as light as possible. So we're gonna get under here.
Oh my God, there's nothing under here.
So this is the rear suspension, titanium spring.
What?
Yeah, this is titanium.
Wait, why are you undoing the caliper?
Yeah, so the rotor is bolted to the wheel. So when we pull the wheel off, the caliper's in the way. So I've got to pull the brake caliper off.
So what you're saying is this is an entire front suspension from a Pro Stock car.
So what we do is this is the outside of the brake caliper and the brake pad.
That's your brake pad?
Yeah. So now we've pulled the outside of the caliper off. Now we can go back to the other side, and the way this works is there's the bearing.
Okay.
The spindle bearing is in here.
Okay. Whoa, cotter pin and.
Yeah, because you guys don't have real tools here. I'm using just a screwdriver.
What are you giving us a hard time about our tools?
A little bit.
Danger Dan has built shit cars with these tools.
This nut will then.
Oh wow, so the wheel doesn't need to be.
So that's the bearing. That's the wheel bearing.
Yes, that's the wheel bearing right there.
So
you're going straight into the wheel bearing.
So we're going to pull the actual wheel bearing off.
You're doing it. You normally don't do this because you normally have to drop the rear suspension.
Oh, there we go. No, I got it.
You just did it.
So then you can see how the rotor mounts onto the wheel. And here's that brake caliper that we had to get out of the way.
Wow.
So this is the spindle. So normally this is on the front of a car, and this is where they'd turn it from.
Yes.
But we just have this as the suspension adjustable point. And it just has these thin little tubes and then a spring that mounts McPherson style to the top of the chassis. And then another cool thing is, so remember our push off button from the, so this lever turns this physical switch down here.
So that's exactly how you do it.
Yeah, so all the power from the battery goes to this.
Yes.
And then it goes back up to power everything.
Wow.
And then under here, this is where the wheelie bars would
so we don't have wheelie bars on it right now. Now you
here
definitely
and then and down on the bottom, also down here.
So what's the adjustability for?
We didn't know exactly where to put it, so we just made a bunch of holes.
Nice.
Yeah. You have to remember, like, a lot of this stuff was at its infancy when we first built it.
No one had done this before. I'll give it credit to the Bergenholtz brothers for doing it first, but
they
didn't have it on a tube chassis car though, so.
Yeah, and it was all, they did it one way, and then we were like, oh, we can do it better. And that's kind of how things evolved. You want to pull the front wheel off?
Yes, and by the way, how small, your wheel bearing, here's my cup for reference here. That's not a wheel bearing, that's nuts.
Yeah,
so again,
it
rolling
only needs to go like
100
and, 1320
feet, right?
Okay. So again, relatively lightweight.
What?
So later cars, we used carbon brakes, but this one was just steel. So it's a very traditional brake setup here. And the spindle is actually a Honda Prelude that's been modified and welded to, and then you can see all the custom suspension on it and more of the tube chassis. Even the trick transmission mount. So the transmission mount is just this plate with this rod, and it mounts up to the chassis. The whole engine is solid mounted.
Because there's essentially no factory OEM body to attach it to. So you had to find a place to mount it to, because you lost the unibody.
Yeah, the car essentially started as just round tubing and flat plates of metal. You had to fabricate it. Yeah, if you look under, it's very just Honda Prelude engine and transmission. It even has the stock oil pan to it.
Stock oil pan, so not even a dry, you don't really need because you're not really loading the oil in any one direction. There's not subject to a lot of G-forces other than accelerative forces, correct?
Yeah, and this was very simple. We didn't get too complex when we built this car. Not really much higher RPM than factory. I think we revved it to maybe 8,000 or 8,500 RPM, which is not crazy. So the wet sump oil can do a good job there. This is the drain for the oil from the oil from the turbocharger. From the turbo. So the oil goes in. Here you can see the fuel system. Out of the tank. Yeah. Yeah. Out of the tank, it goes to the pump, into a fuel filter, and then up to the fuel rail. And then here again is the battery, the 16-volt battery.
You talk about a tube chassis. This is it right here. So these are your stress members underneath.
Yeah, if you look underneath, and remember the floor that we were looking at, I said don't step on it. This is that same piece of aluminum.
That's the aluminum sheet right there.
Yeah.
You guys do this now with the drift program. Were you guys doing would you guys bring the car back after an event and totally clean it and break it down and put it back together again and everything?
Yeah, we would bring it back from an event, we'd clean it, check stuff over. We actually went to a lot of car shows and stuff like that with this, because the whole car show scene was really big, like Import Show Off and Honda Import Nights and stuff like this. This car has a bunch of trophies that it won at car shows.
At car shows, which is crazy, because you know what's funny? I just posted something on the Instagram, shout out to Jared Deanda, who said he remembers seeing this at the Del Mar show off at the Del Mar Fairgrounds, where the car made its car show debut after like a battle.
Yeah, that's right. The magazines would come out and shoot photos and stuff like that. So it was fun to share the car and talk to people about it. You know, a lot of the time when we're at the racetrack, we're super busy working on the cars. But if we go to car shows, then we have more time to just talk about car stuff, talk about the car, and not always be worrying about running it.
Thank you so much, Steph, for bringing this in. With that, let's go look for some import models.